Hey, you ever settle in to watch something, a movie, a news series, maybe even just scrolling through news articles and you just, well, you know kind of thing you're getting?
Hmm.
Like there's a certain feel, right? A set of expectations that just come with it.
Definitely.
So today we're diving into that exact idea, genre in media.
Hmm.
But, the sources you sent over, especially these really interesting excerpts from Steve Neal's work, they kind of throw a curveball
Yeah,
at that whole notion of neat, tidy
I
categories.
really do.
And for you, thinking like a media studies student, this stuff challenges the basic ways we classify and understand the media we consume every day.
That's absolutely right. We often start off thinking of genres as these like solid boxes, westerns over here, comedies there. But Neil really pushes us to reconsider that.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, he suggests genre is much more dynamic. Think of it like a constantly shifting landscape, not fixed borders.
It's not about having a simple checklist of elements, does it have this, this, and this? It's something far more fluid. So the key insight, especially for analysis, is don't just look for what's there.
Right.
Look for how it's both familiar and new. That tension, that's what keeps genres kicking.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit.
Yeah.
So we should sort of forget the idea that a film is a Western just because it has cowboys and horses.
Pretty much, yeah. Or at least it's not that simple.
So what are the limitations of thinking about genre as these fixed categories, according to Neale?
Well, his main point is that genre isn't rigid at all. It's constantly evolving, things are merging, breaking down into smaller subgenres. Sometimes genres even fade away over time.
Hmm.
He argues we can't just look at a set of, surface features and definitively say, right, that is a Western. It doesn't work that way.
So instead,
Instead, we need to understand how genres function. And they function through this interplay of repetition and difference. So from a media studies angle, it means moving past simple labels. It's about understanding the ongoing process of how genres are made and how they change.
repetition and difference, that sounds key. Can you maybe elaborate on it? How does that actually work?
Sure. So Neil posits that genres survive and appeal to us because they give us things we recognize. Familiar story beats, character types we know, visual cues.
The stuff we expect.
Exactly, the stuff we expect. But, and this is crucial, they also need to offer something new, some variation, some twist to keep things interesting and, frankly, commercially viable.
Right, can't just be the same thing over and over.
Precisely. Think of it maybe like a recipe.
Okay.
You've got familiar ingredients, flour, sugar, eggs that make up the base for lots of desserts, right?
Yeah.
But the exact amounts, the additions like chocolate or fruit or maybe a different technique, that creates something distinct, a different, genre of dessert, if you like.
Okay, I like that analogy.
So genres keep their appeal by balancing what we already know with something a little bit novel.
That makes a lot of sense. So if it's not just a checklist, what are the key things Neil points to that help us identify a genre, even if it's fluid?
He highlights several key indicators. One is verisimilitude.
Verisimilitude.
Yeah, basically how real something is trying to seem.
Okay.
So on one end, you've got things like news, documentaries, biopics, historical dramas. Generally, they aim for a pretty high degree of realism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then on the other end, you have sci-fi fantasy
Hmm.
genres that deliberately mess with real-world logic. Thinking about that helps us understand the different expectations we bring.
Okay, so a gritty crime drama feels real, or tries to, while a big space opera just throws the physics book out the window. Got it. What else does Neil consider?
Another really crucial aspect is narrative conventions.
Story structures.
Exactly, the recurring story structures, the techniques we see again and again within genres, like murder mysteries are built on suspense. News reports tend to summarize the key facts right up front. Biopics often lean on flashbacks.
Right, or voiceovers in gangster films, maybe.
Yeah, good example. Even pacing can be a genre marker. Think about the slower rhythm of a long magazine article compared to, a breaking news alert.
Yeah, very different feel.
And then there are common themes, man versus machine pops up a lot in sci-fi, or exploring justice and moral ambiguity in crime dramas. Recognizing these conventions is, well, it's a core skill in media analysis.
Right, you start to expect certain ways the story will unfold based on the genre tag. What about the people in these stories?
Yeah.
The characters?
Yeah, that falls under what Neil calls character motifs. Certain genres tend to feature recognizable character types, even typical character arcs. Think of the flawed anti-hero in so many crime dramas, or the quirky best friend in a rom-com,
The wisecracking sidekick.
or the brilliant but maybe socially awkward scientist in sci-fi. These recurring types help us quickly figure out where we are genre-wise.
And analyzing those, for a media studies student can tell you a lot about maybe societal values or stereotypes.
Exactly. It's a rich area for analysis.
Okay, so we've got the look and feel, how the story's told, the types of characters. What about just what we see? The visuals.
That's iconography. It's all about the expected visual and stylistic elements.
Give me an example.
Okay. A dusty landscape, maybe tumbleweeds, the sound of a lone harmonica.
Western. Instantly.
Right. Or think about a tabloid newspaper. That bold, often read masthead just screams its genre.
Yeah, you know it immediately.
These visual cues act like a kind of shorthand. They help the audience place it instantly. As media studies students, you can look at how iconography reinforces those genre expectations.
Makes sense. You see a spaceship, you're probably not watching Bridgerton.
Probably not.
What about who these things are aimed at? Does that play a role?
Neale definitely considers audience targeting. Genres are often, tailored consciously or unconsciously to specific demographics.
Like how?
Well, the emotional storytelling in a rom-com might be crafted, or at least perceived, to appeal more to women, whereas action-heavy sci-fi has, historically at least, targeted a male audience more directly. Understanding that targeting helps you see how media is often designed to speak to or attract specific groups.
And finally, you mentioned Neale talks about representation. How do genres portray certain groups?
Exactly. This is a big one. Genre conventions can both reflect existing societal views and actively shape how different groups based on gender, race, class, etc. are represented. Recognizing those patterns, like, say, the history of women often being victims in horror, or the trope of the stoic male detective in crime stories, that's really key to understanding genre's power and its potential impact.
Okay, wow. So there are quite a few indicators there, even if the boundaries are fluid. But you mentioned earlier this balance between familiarity and innovation. Why is the familiarity part so important? Why do we like knowing what to expect?
Well, audiences genuinely derive pleasure from the familiar. There's a certain comfort, isn't there?
Yeah, suppose so.
Knowing what to expect, recognizing the codes and conventions, it kind of lets you relax into it. It allows for emotional engagement because you're on familiar ground.
Right.
Genres make media more accessible because we share these understandings. The rough shape of a romantic comedy's emotional journey, for instance. So genres provide this framework of expectations that audiences generally appreciate. They offer specific pleasures too, the thrill of futuristic worlds in sci-fi, the joy of song and dance in musicals, political engagement from news, solving the puzzle in crime dramas.
Got it. There's a satisfaction in seeing those familiar elements done well. But then, where does the difference part come in strongly? Why do genres have to change? Why not just stick with what works?
Well, audiences also crave novelty. We might enjoy the familiar, but honestly, we don't want the exact same story every single time. It gets boring.
Sure.
So when a genre piece, whether it's film or a news report style, tweaks the rules or maybe subverts expectations or introduces something genuinely new that creates surprise, it generates buzz. It keeps the genre feeling fresh, not stale.
So it's this constant negotiation between the comfort of the known and the excitement of the new.
Exactly, a constant push and pull. That's what keeps genres dynamic and alive.
Okay, so what drives this evolution then? What makes genres change?
Neale points to several factors. Audience expectations are definitely a big one. As we, the audience, get more familiar with the genre, we start to anticipate its tropes. We might even get tired of them, or we become more receptive to seeing those tropes played with, maybe broken entirely.
You get harder to surprise?
Kind of, yeah. Then there are cultural and social influences. Society changes, right? Our norms, our values shift. And those shifts inevitably impact how characters are portrayed, what themes resonate, what feels relevant within different genres.
Makes sense. Things that were acceptable in older films feel jarring now.
Precisely. And finally, don't underestimate economic factors. Market trends, huge commercial successes, think about the superhero movie boom, or even big failures, they all drive innovation. Creators and studios are always trying to capture audience attention and will make money.
Right.
So for a media studies viewpoint, analyzing these drivers, audience tastes, cultural shifts, economic pressures, gives you real insight into how media both reflects and influences society.
This seems to lead us perfectly into something you mentioned earlier, genre hybridity. We see so much of that now, it feels like.
Yeah.
What exactly is it, and why is it seemingly everywhere?
Yeah, it is everywhere. Genre hybridity is, simply put, the blending of different genre traditions within one single media product.
So not just a Western, not just a rom-com.
Exactly. Instead of something clear-cut, you get something that draws on elements from both, or maybe even several different genres all mixed together. Think horror comedy or sci-fi western. This blurring of the lines really challenges those traditional genre definitions we started with.
And what are the upsides of doing that? Why are creators leaning into it so much?
Oh, there are loads of advantages. Tonal versatility is a big one.
Meaning?
Meaning, by blending genres, a show or film can shift between different moods much more easily. You can go from comedy to serious drama to suspense, sometimes really quickly. It keeps the audience on their toes. It also allows for trend leveraging. Creators can tap into the popularity of multiple currently hot genres at once. Remember the zombie craze after The Walking Dead?
Oh yeah, zombies were suddenly everywhere.
Right. In horror, sure, but also comedies, romances, period pieces even. Hybridity also pushes towards greater originality just by remixing familiar conventions in unexpected ways.
It gives old tropes a new spin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can bridge that gap between, say, high and low culture. You can embed serious themes within a more accessible, popular genre format. Plus, just combining genres like romance and comedy obviously aims for wider audience appeal.
Trying to catch more people.
Yeah. And don't forget nostalgia. Referencing familiar tropes from different beloved genres can really tack into audience sentimentality. And for today's audiences, who are often really media savvy, hybridity offers rewards through clever references and playing with genre awareness.
It assumes we know the rules they're breaking or blending.
Right. And maybe most fundamentally, it often reflects our own real media habits. We don't consume media in strict genre silos anymore, do we? We flick between things. We like variety.
That's very true.
So for you, as a media studies student, analyzing these hybrids is fascinating. It reveals really complex cultural conversations and how texts talk to each other.
You used Stranger Things as an example earlier. How does that fit this hybridity model?
Oh, Stranger Things is a perfect case study. It just seamlessly blends elements of, well, science fiction, you've got the supernatural experiments, the alternate dimensions.
The upside down.
Right. Then there's horror, the monsters, the jump scares, the suspenseful atmosphere.
Like horror elements.
And layered all through that is this really strong, nostalgic, coming-of-age drama, the focus on the kids, their friendships, the whole 1980s setting.
Yeah, the music, the clothes.
That combination, that blend, is a massive part of its appeal. It really shows how effective genre blending can be. It hits multiple spots at once.
It feels like it's speaking to lots of different genre preferences simultaneously. Now, Neale also talks about the influence of the industry itself. How do things like, say, individual creators or the big media organizations shape the genres we end up seeing?
Yeah, that's crucial too. Neale discusses auteur influence.
Auteur, like a distinctive director.
Exactly. How individual creative figures, directors, writers, sometimes even key actors can bring their own distinct style, their own thematic interests to genre productions. And sometimes they can even shift our expectations of that genre.
Any examples spring to mind?
Well, think about someone like, say, J.J. Abrams and his particular visual style, the lens flares, the kinetic energy that he brings to science fiction films he's involved with.
Okay, yeah, I can picture that.
It shows how an individual artistic vision can leave a real mark on broader genre conventions.
So one person can definitely shape things. What about the bigger players?
Yeah.
The studios, the TV networks, the streaming platforms.
Their role, what Neale calls institutional shaping, is massive. Media organizations make strategic decisions all the time. Think about scheduling.
How so?
Well, they often schedule genre content based on assumed audience habits or seasonal trends. We see horror movies clustered around Halloween, right?
Mm-hmm.
Family-friendly films pop up during school holidays. Prestige historical dramas often get Sunday evening slots. That's shaping genre consumption.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. What else?
Beyond just scheduling, different media outlets often apply their own house styles to genres. Think about news.
Okay.
Multiple newspapers might cover the same major event, but how they frame it, their political leanings, the overall tone, that's them applying their institutional style to the conventions of the news genre. The Guardian reports a story differently than the Times, which reports it differently than the Telegraph, even if the basic facts are the same.
Right. Different angles, different emphasis.
You see it really clearly in television, too. Take crime dramas, they're a staple everywhere. But a public service broadcaster, like the BBC in the UK, might approach them with a focus on social commentary, maybe more diversity in casting and storylines,
Okay.
whereas a commercial channel might prioritize big-name stars and maybe more straightforward, action-packed narratives to grab that broader audience appeal. Same genre, different institutional flavor.
So understanding those institutional forces is pretty key for media studies students, too.
Absolutely. It helps you grasp the whole context of why we get the media, we get the production side, the distribution side, not just the text itself.
Wow. It really is fascinating to think about all these different forces constantly pushing and pulling, shaping and reshaping the genres we consume. So for you, the media studies student listening in, getting your head around Neale's perspective really gives you a much more nuanced way to look at media, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's not just about sticking labels on things, putting them in boxes. It's about understanding this ongoing conversation, this dance between what's familiar and what's new.
Precisely. It moves you beyond just labeling a film as sci-fi and encourages you to ask, okay, what kind of sci-fi is it? What traditions is it playing with? Where is it innovating? Why might the creators have made those choices?
Right.
It allows for a much, much deeper and more insightful analysis of any media text.
So, okay, to kind of wrap things up here, the big takeaway seems to be that genre isn't some static, fixed thing set in stone.
Definitely not.
It's alive, it's constantly moving, it's the system built on repeating familiar stuff while also always finding ways to be different. And it's influenced by the creators, the industries, and of course by us, the audience.
Exactly. It's a dynamic interplay, a constant negotiation, not just a fixed definition you look up somewhere.
Okay, brilliant. So, for one final thought for you to chew on, think about a movie, a TV show, maybe even a trend in news coverage you've seen recently. How does Neale's idea of genre fluidity, this repetition and difference thing, help you understand why it's popular, or maybe how it's changed over time? What familiar bits does it rely on? And where does it maybe try to break new ground or surprise you?
Hopefully, after this discussion, you can approach your own media analysis with a more dynamic and critical eye.